We have no additions, corrections, and modifications to this evening's agenda, I believe.
That's correct.
All right. Citizen statements. If anyone wishes to address the board, now would be the time. Please fill out a goldenrod sheet and turn it in to our recording secretary. And in the glare, I can't see who's running the cameras for us.
Stephen Thompson.
Stephen is doing it. All right, great. So I'd like to recognize Steve Thompson for running the cameras for us this evening and give everybody a chance to fill out those goldenrod sheets. We do have one, all right? And it's the same Stephen Thompson. All right. Steve, you know the routine after watching us so many times. Make sure the mic's on.
My name is Stephen Thompson. Good evening, school board and community members. I have addressed the board previously in regards to the job status of our deans. While I don't have much to add tonight that I did not express at the previous meeting, I would like to once more implore the school board to act responsibly and take the best actions for our students and staff. The decision you reach tonight will have a far-reaching impact on not only the student body walking the halls of UHS now, but those who will occupy our desk and focus on our chalkboards for years to come. Though great waves of change may need to reach the shores of our disciplinary system, bear in mind that the deans we have now are our pillars. Without them, many of us will lose our guiding lights. We will lose those who we talk to in times of need, who lift us up when our spirits are low. A boat without a lighthouse is just asking for a crash. I can go on and on about the deans mean to our entire school. I can go on and on about how our deans help me grow as a student. However, the fate of our district ultimately lies in your hands tonight. I trust that you have all the information needed to make the right decision tonight. However, I once more urge you to consider that the wrong decision could have a far worse impact than would no decision at all. I leave you with a quote from Atticus Finch, who knew doing the right thing was an absolute necessity, even those around him condemned him for doing so. In the name of God, do your duty.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Anyone else wish to address the board this evening? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on. There is no call for any exec session after tonight's meeting. A motion to approve the agenda would be in order.
So moved. Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion is carried. We have no administrative reports tonight or communications. However, we do have some action items. I think they can be handled as a consent agenda. 8.01 is a resolution authorizing and directing the sale or disposal of personal property, and this is primarily out-of-date electronic equipment. We do have personnel items, one personnel item, and if we wish to comment on that, I'll give an opportunity for that. And then 8.03 is the bid for the resurfacing or the replacement of the Oscar Adams gym floor, which was part of our summer work project. So any comment on the personnel item?
Yes. I again have the happy task of introducing administrators new to their position, new administrators. Tonight, I get to announce Shauna Shear as our new Director of Student Engagement in Urbana Adult Education. She'll replace Ms. Arlene Anderson, who will be retiring at the end of the school year. Ms. Shear's new position starts on July 1st of 2018. Since July of 2017, Shauna Scheer has been the associate principal at Urbana Middle School. This was a title change from assistant principal, which she served as from 2013. Prior to coming to the middle school, she was principal of Gerber School at Cunningham's Children's Home from 2017 to 2007 to 2013. She served Gerber and Columbia Center Alternative School in Champaign as special education teacher from 1997 to 2000 and 2000 to 2002, respectively. She returned to USD as behavior specialist in 2002. Shauna Scheer earned a Master of Education in Educational Organization and Leadership in 2007 from University of Illinois. Her Bachelor's of Science is in Special Education and was earned in 1997 from Illinois State University. I'm going to ask her to come up and say a few words. Would you please help me congratulate Shauna Scheer?
There we go. Good evening. I would like to thank the board and the district administration for this opportunity. In case you weren't doing the math, when Kathy was taking a walk down my memory lane, I've been in our district for 19 of my 21 years. 10 years ago, we moved to Urbana so that our daughter could attend Urbana schools, and she's currently a 4th grader at Dr. Williams. She did not want me to mention that. I am deeply committed to our district and to the Urbana community at large, and I am very excited for this new opportunity and really grateful to our district for investing in and supporting my professional growth all of these years. In terms of this new position, I am very excited about the opportunity to lead at the district level while also maintaining contact with students on a daily basis. That student contact is something that's really important to me, and I'm excited that I don't have to give that up in order to continue my growth. Ms. Anderson, the previous directors, and the adult ed staff have done a phenomenal job of building a program that really meets the unique needs of our students and our community. And I'm excited about continuing to build upon that, that program and all of the successes that they've had so that we can continue to meet our mission that all of our students achieve their personal greatness. So thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm so excited for July to get here.
Thank you. And I guess we should indicate that the bid for the gym floor is within budget as we had outlined it. So, anyone wish to pull any of those 3 items off the consent agenda? If not, motion to approve the consent agenda would be in order.
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Member Carter?
Yes.
Member Hall?
Yes.
Member Pulaski?
Yes.
Member Fisher votes yes. Vice President Rollins
Yes.
Day, and President Dennett.
Yes. We're now ready to move forward into our study session topics, and the first of these this evening is our disciplinary and academic disparities study or data at the secondary level. Don?
Yeah, so I'd like to invite Linda Gibbons, who's our Director of Grant-Based Programs, and works closely with our building leaders in implementation of PBIS, as well as looking at our disciplinary data to come up, and she will do the first part of this, and then we will tag team with Dr. Woods, Mr. Stark, and myself, kind of talking about the implications of this data.
Lights, turn the mic on.
Mike.
Is it on now? Okay. Okay, so, you know, I worked as director of grant-based programs, but I've also worked for the district around the area of social and emotional learning, PBIS, and some of those related topics. More recently, are we okay?
No, I'm trying to get the lights turned off.
It's not working. Okay, so more recently, I've been working with a lot of the Swiss data, which shows us our discipline data for the schools at the elementary school level. And tonight we're going to be talking about the middle school and high school data. And both of those buildings have done a really good job putting together their data. And then Diamond Robinson at the district office, central office, has done a really fabulous job putting together some really nice graphs for us that I think show us really easily what's taking place in our district at that secondary level. So, thanks to Diamond too. So I thought I'd just tell you just briefly two terms that you might hear tonight, and just so you're sure of the terminology. So when we talk about disproportionate, we mean overrepresented, out of proportion. And when you hear the term disparity, we're referring to inequitable outcomes. So as we look at these graphs tonight, there are 11 different graphs. 5 are for the middle school, 6 are for the high school. And what you're going to see are numbers for the overall students, each student that will be represented on the graph. So it's not necessarily, it's not repeat incidents, it's students' overall student numbers, all right? You'll also be seeing that for the 2017-18 school year, it is a partial year. We're still in progress. So you'll see full years 2015 and 16, a full year for 2016-17, and a partial year for 2017-18. So we're not to the end yet. Over to the right-hand corner of the graphs, they're gone, but you all have the graphs. You all have those handouts. To the right-handed side of that page, you will see the code, the color code for the different columns on the graph. And also, you will see the numbers at the top of each column, so you can see how many students are represented in each of those columns. So I guess we'll start with the very first graph, and that is for Urbana High School. And students with 1 or more referrals. And what I'm gonna do is I'm not gonna read you numbers. I'm just gonna kind of summarize what the graph says. So on the first graph,
Linda, let me interrupt you
Yes.
for a second. Are we not going to get anything?
I'm restarting my computer.
Okay. How about we take a break until the,
Oh, sure.
let's just take a pause then,
Yeah.
until we get the graphics up.
I saw it.
She's not going to be too long.
All right, so how do I flip it to the next slide, Carol? Where is that? Here we go. It's right here, right?
Oh, how do you move it? You
Yeah.
can arrows there.
Oh, there, okay. All right. Thanks, Carol.
Okay.
All right. So, is that it? All right. Pardon? Help. Sorry about this. I am totally out of whack here. Oh, there we are. Okay, thank you. Okay. Ready? All right. So the very first slide that we're going to look at is for students with 1 or more referrals. You'll see the color code on the right-hand side, and then the number of students at the top of each graph. You'll see the year that each set of columns are representing. So in this one, we can see that the red column for the black students represents the ethnicity with the greatest number of referrals. And you will notice that it's kind of up and down. So we started with 212 in 15-16. We went up to 241 in 16-17, and then came back down at this point in the school year. So the number of referrals for black students has increased from 2015-16 to 2016-17, and this number could potentially increase more at the end of 17-18. Black students are sent out of the classroom nearly 3 times more often than white students, and the number of referrals for white students has decreased to date, while all other ethnicity groups are stable. So the next graph shows us the students with out-of-school suspensions over the last 3 years. This graph shows out-of-school suspensions have increased over the past 3 years for black and white students, but we see a disproportionate number of black students are represented in out-of-school suspensions when compared to the other racial groups. The only group showing an increase is the multiracial. And the next graph is Urbana High School out-of-school suspension disparity ratios by black students when compared to white students. And what this shows you is that if the line, okay, so the green is the white students, the red are black students, and if the line runs along the 1, then that is showing that it's equal representation. If it's over 1, it's showing overrepresentation by that group, and if it's under the 1, it's underrepresentation. So what we're seeing here is that there's an overrepresentation in out-of-school suspensions for our African American students, while there's an increase in underrepresentation for the white students. So the next slide is for Urbana High School, the number of students with in-school suspensions over the past 3 years. And what this one is showing us is that, that at the same time out-of-school suspensions have decreased, in-school suspensions have increased for black students in 2016-17. The outcome for 2017-18 school year is still to be determined, and other racial groups are showing a decrease in in-school suspensions. The 5th graph is in-school suspension disparity ratio for black and white students. So again, this is showing the disparity between black students with in-school suspensions and white students with in-school suspensions. And as you can see, there is disparity between the two groups. There's overrepresentation in in-school suspensions for the African American students, and there's underrepresentation for the white students. And that disparity has increased over the years, too, over the past 3 years. And finally, for Urbana High School, we have the D's and F's over the past 3 years. So, you know, this one is a snapshot of students that have D's and F's over the last 3 years. It looks like in 2015-16, school year had the least number of D's and F's, and those numbers have increased for all but one racial group. And as we look at the data, it's important to note that students who are excluded from the classroom for disciplinary practices miss out on instructional time, social skill building, and being a part of the larger learning community. So students of color are overrepresented in an exclusionary discipline, and hence one possible explanation for the wide disparity between black students and white students in academics and behavior. And next we move on to the middle school data, and once again it's all 3 consecutive years, and you will see that the racial groups are represented by the color code on the right-hand side. So the first graph that we're going to be looking at is students with one or more referrals. And there's an increase in one or more referrals for several racial groups. Black students are approximately 3 times more likely to get a referral than the other groups. And then, let's see, moving on to the second graph, students with out-of-school suspensions. The past 2 years show most racial groups see a decrease in out-of-school suspensions. And I know the following presenters will talk about in 2015-16, that's when our restorative practices programs started in these 2 schools. And then in 2016-17, that's when SB 100 also started in the state. So in this graph for out-of-school suspensions, we see that in the past 2 years, it shows the most racial groups see a decrease in out-of-school suspensions. I think I mentioned that. And we're not sure. Will this be a downward trend continuing into 17, 18, and moving forward? But at this point, it was, a decrease for all levels, but of course you can still see the disproportionate numbers between African American students and white students. Let's see, we have on this graph, it is out-of-school disparity ratios for black students and white students. And there's a little bit of difference. We looked at this one this afternoon and tried to figure, is the disparity decreasing a bit? We can't really tell. There's an upward curve going into 2017-18, but there's also an upward on for the African American students too. So I think it kind of equals out, and we'll just have to see how that plays out. And finally, this is the students in school suspension over the past 3 years at Urbana Middle School. And the number of in-school suspensions remains high for black students, while the other racial groups mostly decrease. So, this is interesting because programming seems to be working for certain groups at the school. And I mean, really, those numbers are, are dramatically low. But, then the other side of that is that we're looking at the African American students who still really fluctuate, and this present year have as many in-school suspensions, more in-school suspensions as last year, and the year is not over. And then the last graph is about in-school suspension disparity ratios, and you can see that the disparity between white and black students continues to show quite a gap. And we don't have a slide for Fs and Ds for the middle school. And maybe Scott can address that. But I think, what we're seeing is that the district data is consistent with national trends in disparity between black and white students. But I don't want that to sound like an excuse, because to me what that says is that we have to, now is the time to really do something about it and to begin to work on it. It's not because it's consistent with a national trend, to me, doesn't mean, oh, we just, throw our hands up. There's nothing we can do. I really believe that this is the time for us. We can really make some changes, do some things differently, and really hopefully impact the data and our programs and our schools for all students. Every time I look at these numbers, I realize that every single one of those numbers is a student. And are we helping them to achieve their personal greatness? And that, to me, is truly our goal, and that all students should be a part of that.
Are there any questions for Linda about the data up to this point? We can also have her come back.
I have a question. First of all, you said the national trend. I'm looking at Chicago schools, the 150 boys from the South Side, very low income and poverty, parents, no high school education, the achievement level, 150 of them were sent where my son was to Morehouse, one of your top, because they had 3.5s and above. So, yeah, there's something wrong, but when you say national trends, then I look at DC, started these academies, especially for your black males. That should be added in with the trend. I think the national study is not accurate for now. It might have been for 2005, but I do a lot of evidence-based study, and that's not accurate. For this area, for us here, this is correct. And all I want to know is, I want to see the basis of these referrals, because if it's wearing a hat because your hair is nappy and you don't want to be made fun of, and so the teacher puts you out instead of compassionately saying, why are you wearing this hat? What's going on? I don't have water in my house. My family, it's 5 families in a house.
Well,
They're looking at all of that in Chicago, and with these young boys, those were some of the things that they came to Morehouse with 3 pair of pants because grandma was raising them. But
And you know, I think that we're saying the same thing, Benita, that, you know, there is a discrepancy across the board, but that there are some things that we can do to change that.
Right.
And like what you're saying about kids being sent out of class for things like hats and things like that are probably, we don't want
I
to,
bet they're on here.
well, this is overall.
Yeah, yeah.
But we don't want that to happen
Yeah.
because kids are then sent out of the classroom. Well, I should say, that's my opinion, is that, you know, we don't want them sent out of the classroom missing instructional time and other things that are going on in the school for issues like that. You know, it used to be that there was a zero tolerance policy, and kids were suspended and out of classroom time because of maybe guns or those extreme behaviors. But that has changed, you know. Now
Yeah, but
kids can
that's-
sometimes be suspended for things that are more subjective, like disrespect, defiance, and those kind of things. So it increases the number. But I think we're saying the same thing.
Thank you.
I have a question, and it could be either for you or Mr. Stark or Dr. Woods, whoever has the answer, but do we have the actual numbers for all 3 of those academic years, the actual number breakdown of each of the racial groups, either in the head count or percentage of the population? Because these numbers, I mean, while they are high, to put them in context would to know, are blacks the majority, are whites the majority, where do Latinos fit in there proportionally, and that would help me understand
So
these
are you
graphs
talking
better.
about the D's, F's?
No, I mean
in
total
particular?
school
Oh, okay.
population.
Okay,
You mean
we'll
the
have
total
to-
number of referrals, not just how many students got a referral, correct?
No, I meant the whole school. I just
Oh.
want to know, like,
Oh.
out of this
Yeah,
212 students in, say, 2015, how many
Yep.
total black students are there at UHS and UMS? And I'd like to be able to see those for all 3 of these
Sure.
years.
I can, if you want, I can give them to you right now. I have
Sure.
them in front of me. And we can definitely attach those with the board packet and put it up online later. But, so 15, 16 UMS is, and actually I'm going to ask, I don't know, Todd or Samuel, if you could look for the UHS ones.
I have those down.
You have those? Okay. So UMS, Asian Pacific Islander, hang on, I'm not looking at the right thing here. I'm sorry. Let me pause for a second. Linda,
Yeah,
why
I
don't
have-
you go through?
Okay,
You have-
so 2015-16 Asian Pacific Islander, 42. Black non-Hispanic, 316. Hispanic, 135. White, 318. American Indian Alaskan, 2. Multiracial, 83. 2016-17, 39 Asian Pacific. Black non-Hispanic, 305. Hispanic, 135. White, 326. American Indian, 5. Multiracial, 84. 2017-18, 39 Asian Pacific Islander, 305 Black non-Hispanic, 135 Hispanic, 326 white, 5 American Indian, multiracial 87. Do you want the totals for the school, or do you want me to just?
That's the total population for UMS for those 3 academic
Right.
years, right?
Mhm.
UHS,
And,
I'm
no,
sorry.
I'm sorry, that was UMS.
Those UMS.
And, yeah, so the total population was 896 in 15-16, 894 in 16-17, 897 in 17-18. And then for the high school, you want to go through all these? Are you ready? Okay. Asian American 2015-16, 57, Black 379, Hispanic 108, White 450, American Indian 7, multiracial 70. 2016-17, 56 Asian, 411 Black, 131 Hispanic, 421 White, 7 American Indian, and 78 multiracial. 17-18, 60 Asian Pacific, 438 Black, 151 Hispanic, 431 White, 15 American Indian, and 85 multiracial. You're welcome. Totals. 1,071 in 2015-16, 1,104 in 2016-17, 1,180 in 2017-18.
Thanks, Linda.
Other questions of Lynn?
At what point in the year are those totals from?
Well, in 15-16, it would have been at the end of the school year. In 16-17, it would have been the end of the school year. And in 17-18, it's at this point, or recently. So it's a good idea of what we're going to have of students, but it could change a bit. Right.
Snapshot earlier in the year for some of
Right. Yes.
One more question.
Sure.
So the numbers you presented were mostly, students with one or more referrals or one or more suspensions. Do the students who have are the students who have multiples more likely to also follow these patterns, or does it amplify the disparity, or is it?
I don't have that specific data in front of me.
If I get what you're saying, you're asking, does the disparity increase because of the number of referrals?
Yeah.
And so it's not the number of
exactly.
referrals, it's the number of students. So if you're in one time, that's
Yeah.
it.
If you broke down the number of referrals who were received by these subgroups, does the disparity ratio even increase?
When we've
even
looked at this
further?
in the past,
I'm
there's
just
usually a couple of what are termed high flyers. Folks that get 10, 15, 20, 25 referrals versus a person that gets one referral. But the data you presented to us tonight, it's one person, whether they got one referral or 25 referrals. It's just one person,
Yes.
the data tonight. So what Paul is asking is, would this pattern be amplified or modulated a little bit if we took a look at the number of suspensions or number of referrals, number of referrals, versus assigning it by the number of students? If the universe were the number of referrals as opposed to the number of students.
Broken down by subgroups.
Have we done that, or is that going to take more research?
We could actually do that fairly easily. The reason why we focused on this as number of students is because this actually demonstrates the real number of students that are impacted by this. But I mean, I know that both middle school and high school have looked at the data both ways as part of their school improvement planning process. So I don't know if Matt or Scott, who are more familiar with the data right off the top of your heads, if you could answer that right now, or should we bring it back next week with a little bit more? I don't want to guess.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
We'll pull that together for next board meeting.
Thank you for your
Sorry,
time.
other questions for Linda this evening? I know our next topic's going to bleed right into this, so or move forward into
Yeah.
it, so.
Well, it's still part of the same
Yeah.
report. So I'd ask Matt and Scott to come up, and the three of us will kind of tag team. One of the reasons why we wanted to share the data in this format was because board members asked to see it. And I wanted to make sure that you had, one, a way of looking at the data that was consistent over time, but also then could be measured as we move forward. And so we can just continue to add to this data as we move forward. The other thing that that board members asked about was, one, the process that's happening in the schools. And I'd like to take a few minutes to talk about the process that's happening at the district level, because after the first board meeting that we had this as a discussion topic, one of the things that I did was I responded immediately to one of the requests from one of the public comments, and that was come and talk to us as a staff. And so the following Wednesday, my administrative team and I went and met with the entire high school staff, and a few days later we met with the entire middle school staff. We also met with the deans and the union leadership. We clarified some things. We also discussed ways of making sure that the current deans were not feeling like they were the ones who were responsible for these disparities. I've said this several times in front of the board, but I want to take a moment to say it now, that this is a problem with our system. And it's a systemic issue that as superintendent, I have to take responsibility for. And I also have to say, I cannot allow these trend lines to continue. If you take a look at the risk ratios or the disparity ratios, and you see the trends that are happening there, that's not acceptable. I can't go back to any student, any family member, and really to any teacher or administrator and say, this is what Urbana is about. This is not the Urbana way. And I'm just saying, as superintendent, yeah, there are times when you have to shake things up in order to fix things. And this is one of those times. Achieving excellence and equality for all students is possible. It requires an honest look at the beliefs, structures, practices, and the willingness to do what it takes to make change. Schools should not be daunted and must begin immediately. There are too many students who cannot wait. That actually comes from Eric Witherspoon, who was a colleague of mine when I first became superintendent. He was superintendent in District 202, and I heard him present at the Joint Annual Conference up in Chicago a few years ago. He was talking about the fact that equity and excellence are two things that cannot be separated, that those two things have to come together if you really want to have achievement for all students. In this district, we are committed to restorative practices, and we're also committed to creating equitable outcomes for our historically marginalized students. Since implementing restorative practices 2 years ago and implementing the changes required by SB 100, the overall use of exclusionary practices has dropped at both UMS and UHS, and that's something we should celebrate. However, we also need to take a look at the equity ratios in this, because as our overall numbers have dropped, the likelihood of a student of color being the student who is suspended out of school, who is missing class time, and therefore potentially losing academic opportunities, has increased in percentage with the overall population of the school. The systems that we've created and that we've lived by have actually magnified the disparities rather than reducing them. I truly believe that now is the time when we are seeing our disciplinary numbers drop and when we're seeing an increase in the use of restorative practices to make a shift to substantially alter the way students experience supports and challenges at our school. Disparity ratios for students of color, especially black and multiracial students, have been growing over the past 3 years. As Linda said, the disparity ratio measures the relationship between the percentage of a group represented in a school population makeup and the percentage of students in that group who are represented in some other data that we collect. For example, referrals, suspensions, or students with D's and F's. The example that one of our math teachers gave in public comment the other day was that if 37% of a school's population are black or African American and 37% of the students receiving a referral were black or African American, the disparity ratio would be 1.0. In short, any number above 1 represents an overrepresentation of a racial group, and any number below 1 represents an underrepresentation of a group. At the high school, with out-of-school suspensions for this year, that number is approaching 0 for white students, while it's over 2 for black students. That's not acceptable. That's not the Urbana way. The systems that we have in place have turned into an almost perfectly inequitable system. And as superintendent, I cannot allow that to continue. The work that we have done related to racial equity is based on the premise that there are individual, institutional, and structural barriers to racial equity. Much of our professional development for the last 2 years has focused on the individual and relational aspects of inequity and racial bias. At the district and at the board level, part of our task here is to address the systemic and the structural. And we have to wrestle with those problems. And I appreciate the fact that you are asking questions and wrestling with those same problems. I also appreciate the fact that we have members of both schools wrestling with and questioning those same problems. As we work together, as we move forward, we're seeing more and more people say, yes, I understand that the purpose and this discussion is not about deans. It's about students, and it's about providing supports for students so that we have more equitable outcomes. What I'd like to do is talk to you a little bit about what we've done already. I guess I kind of started that at the beginning of mine. Have Matt and Scott, I've had the pleasure of sitting in on several of Scott's building leadership team meetings over the past couple weeks, listening to his process. And I haven't made it over to one of Matt's yet, but I'm hopeful that as I become a little bit more mobile, I'll get over to his as well. But Scott, why don't you talk a little bit about some of the things that you've already done in your building to address these ratios, as well as kind of the process moving forward, engaging staff, families, and students in the discussion of creating a plan.
Thank you, Mr. Stark. Good evening, everyone. The part that I would just talk about right now is what we're doing, what I'm doing with my teachers and support staff as we talk through what our needs are and what we would like to see as a building. I'm calling it a 5-step process, but to the staff it just feels like meetings. But the goal of these meetings is increasing appropriate student behaviors, which we will ultimately come together with a proposal for Dr. Owen for next year that will include a plan for time, tools, training, and staffing as determined by all of us at UMS. We began meeting last Monday, March 26th, then we met again yesterday. At this time, we're scheduled to meet for the next 3 Mondays, and I'm doing some legwork in between those meetings. All UMS staff, certified and non-certified, are able to attend, and our meetings are taking place during our regular Monday meeting time so that it's not an additional meeting for staff. All members of our building leadership team, which that's what our school improvement team is called, are required to participate, but all others that are there are just there voluntarily. I think we had 25 or 30 folks there yesterday evening. We are engaging, and that is where we are, and hopefully by the end of April I'll have some concrete plans for a proposal for Dr. Owen.
Mr. Stark?
Sure. So we, as Dr. Owen pointed out, we continue to add restorative practice and continue to work through that. We focused this first semester specifically on focus on the D&F by both teacher and by department to review ways in which curriculum can be more accessible. As far as moving forward on changes, I met with staff on, I did a Tuesday voluntary meetings. I've done a few of those. I've also had 25 individual staff members and a couple in small groups that come to see me. We have a school leadership team meeting that meets tomorrow, in which I'll go over kind of where we are with those kind of things. The voluntary meetings also had TAs and support staff and a variety of people that have attended that. For students, I made myself accessible during lunch periods to talk to the students and get their feedback. We also met with the Homeroom Congress and talked to them about some of the issues that were going on. Next, not this Wednesday, but a week from this Wednesday, we'll meet with department chairs. And an announcement went out today to invite, and we'll do another announcement as well as a voicemail blast out to parents and teachers and students for April 12th at 6 o'clock. Will be an opportunity for them to come forward and see kind of where we are. The scope of this is, at this point, is to kind of provide somewhat of a framework of ideas going forward. We'll continue to want to collaborate, had a very good discussion at a voluntary meeting today with some ideas that go beyond the scope of personnel, but into how can we use existing systems and transform existing systems and use them more readily to be able to do those kind of things. So the discussions are ongoing. I've also met with my administrative team as we work through some of the logistics and those kind of things. As we go through this, as we look through this, we're looking at trying to move from a very reactive system of how we do things to being proactive. Some of the things we've also done in the past is the English department has done a program in which we do a step ahead program where students who've done well in the top 9 have the opportunity to access our upper curriculum. Our math classes have done things in the summers to do those kind of things. But those are programs that we've done within an existing system that we have, and so to make changes to the system and to be able to do some of those things, I think is necessary to make bigger steps and to reach bigger outcomes.
Are there any questions from board members for any of us?
I'd like to start out. Scott, you said you started meeting on March the 26th, but I was under the impression that there were meetings before that, a substantial amount of work done before that, leading up to the meeting on the 26th? By your school improvement team, or your school leadership team? Am I in error?
I'm going to need you to clarify. I'm sorry. I didn't hear the beginning of your question.
You indicated that you started with a meeting on the 26th of March, but I was under the impression that a substantial amount of work had been done prior to that. Was that work involving wasn't that work involving your leadership team?
It involved me, Patrick Russell, and Shauna Shear prior to March 26th.
Okay. Okay.
So the 2 administrators with me.
Okay. All right. And Matt, the same question then at the high school. I mean, the plans are, these meetings started, but wasn't there a lot of pre-work leading up to the meetings?
Well, I guess I would note that March 26th is the first Monday back from spring break, so we did not have meetings over spring break to.
Oh, sure, I understand
those
that.
kind of things. There were some preliminary meetings about some of the things that were going on as far as possibilities and some staffing before that, but not extensive until after we got back from spring break and really kind of rolling things out and opening it up for staff. So.
Okay.
Well, just to kind of nail down the timeline, when the decision, I guess, the decision to change the role of the deans did it come up from your planning staff, or did it come from central office? And if so, when were you informed of that?
I was informed that the dean's positions were being eliminated, I think the second Monday of February.
Okay. Were there any prior discussions with your staff and central office before that point about that possibility, or was it just?
I had discussions with some central office staff about reorganizing or shifting job descriptions for counselors and deans.
Okay, thanks. Same with you,
Could you
Matt,
clarify how long those discussions have been happening?
I don't know that we've had formal sit-down, long discussions about that. It's ideas that have been floated. I think we're always trying to look at how our, the staff that we currently have can meet the needs of the students. So, I mean, I was at a point for sure this year where needing to look at how our deans and counselors work with students around behavior and social emotional support was something that we wanted to focus on, and making sure that we're better able to support all of the students.
I had a question for Matt. This meeting you're having on April the 12th, I hope that the parents that are invited are of the 212, all the disciplinary, instead of the parents that don't really need to be there, that you reach out to these parents. And if we got outreach workers, let them know, because there's a gap somewhere. And I need that gap filled. And I want to make sure that they are there. So what process are you doing to address these parents?
So one of the ways we've notified is we do an email blast out and then a voicemail blast out. The voicemail blast out as
They don't have internet. They
No,
got
the
those phones.
No,
but
the voicemail blast tends to have a better, because then it leaves a message on their phone. So anybody that we have phones on, we do a voicemail blast out to the entire group, and generally we'll do a couple of those. But we're more than happy to put together the list and, you know, do some more personal invites to people to come out to that. So,
Yeah, because I'd like to see that list, because a lot of them are grandparents raising kids, so you really got to get them out.
as we do that
So they
voicemail
know,
blast, we'll
yeah.
continue to pursue and try to
Yeah.
get that, with work schedules and stuff like that is difficult, but, you know, we'll certainly reach out.
Okay.
And I know there was some mention earlier about possibly engaging the parent liaisons as well to help with that, making sure that.
Oh, that would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I guess I'd
yeah.
also emphasize that April 12th is not a single and one-time, one and only kind of thing. Is I think it's important that as we move forward that any system that we put in place has to be dynamic, it has to be responsive, and not as it goes forward, it needs to be flexible to be able to adjust and adapt.
Okay.
So I guess this question will be for central off. Oh, sorry, did I interrupt? I'm sorry. No. So I was looking through the board policy manual, and section 2-150 speaks to the only real standing committee that's spelled out by the board, and that's the parent-teacher advisory committee. So I was wondering, yes, this is a big change, and it's specifically chartered to look at student discipline, and it has parents, it has teachers. Was that group thought to examine this or give input?
No, that's a good question, and the short answer to that is no. The Parent Advisory Committee this year has been working on a variety of issues, including the Parent Academy that happened earlier, I guess, last month. And it specifically had issues of student discipline and disparity presented at that Parent Academy. But there wasn't, you know, we didn't have a formal meeting with that Parent Academy to roll out some of these ideas.
Mr. Woods, have you been able to talk with the students at all at the middle school about some of these changes? Or I know Mr. Stark said he's talked to several students at the high school. I didn't know if you had talked to anyone at
I've had no formal process with the students to discuss it.
All right.
I think at this point, or I would, with my age level of kids, I'd rather have more of a specific plan to kind of explain what will be happening. So definitely the deans have been having those conversations with their students because they're asking them.
And what exactly is the timeline for a specific plan? Do we have one?
I think
Are we just beginning it? I mean,
Well, I think what's happening right now is the buildings are collecting information. I think Dr. Woods said that he planned to have a plan or proposal by the end of April. I'm guessing that Mr. Stark is probably on a similar timeline. I have not set a deadline for that because I want to make sure that the buildings feel like they've had time to wrestle with the ideas and talk about the supports needed. But I do think that the sooner we have ideas and plans in place, the sooner we can move forward and start issues of professional development and hiring and, training.
When you talk about hiring now, exactly, are you talking about certified staff? Are you talking about non-certified staff? Or do you have any idea exactly yet?
I don't have any idea exactly yet. We did have some agreements between the union and building and district administration about making sure that a certain number of people were in certified staff positions, and making sure that the current deans were not losing any pay if they chose to keep certain after hours duties and extended day duties. And so those kinds of things are already in place. And that's why, just to speak to one thing about Mr. Thompson's public comment tonight, that's why the board isn't having a decision about riffing the dean's extra days or duties, is because the people who are currently deans get to keep those extra days and duties and pay if they choose to.
I think in plain language, the decision was made to not riff the deans.
Yeah, the extra
Yeah.
duty stipends
Yeah.
for them, which
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
the whole
Yes.
point. They were not going to be losing positions in the district by any means.
Will we as a board be able to get any of the information, Mr. Starks, that from the students themselves? Several students have reached out to me. I know you've talked to different groups at the high school and stuff. I would just be curious as to what some of their input.
So, a number of the inputs is to keep things that we currently have, the pieces that we currently have, such as somebody to connect with or somebody that they can go to or that go-to person within the scope of that. I think as we continue to move forward and look at ways to kind of reorganize how some things go, we talked about, I think their concern was that deans would, the individuals that were in those roles would be gone, and we've talked to them, I've talked to them about how we might change the role in which that they serve and those kind of things, but still would, those individuals would still be there. As we build more relationships and have more people to build relationships with them, I think that starts to become part of it. In the discussion, especially with the Student Congress, in talking about the Homeroom Congress and talking about over-representation piece, some kids came up to me later and talked about some questions that they had about some of the data and some of the information. So as you have students or families reach out to you, I would encourage them to please, redirect them and send them to us, because I obviously want to hear more of those. We talked about meeting with different club organizations to reach out and to try and impact more students as need be, but happy to meet with any student group or any group of students as they come forward.
Could you, I'm sorry.
No, you go.
I was just going to ask if you could refresh my mind as to how many deans of ethnic background we have currently.
So at the high school, Mr. Morrow is an African-American male, and the other two deans are a white female and white male.
Okay, and at the middle school?
I believe they all identify as white.
Okay, thank you.
So my question was added on with Brenda's. You said the go-to person. I don't think this group of students said they had a go-to person.
Okay.
So now if they had a go-to person, this would be down. And so my concern is when you talk about the go-to person, that person is the one that interacts with them and knows what's going on, and therefore the discipline goes down. So I'm not understanding. They're saying that all the deans are the go-to people. Are these students that are doing well, that are concerned about what's going on, the ones that are reaching out? I know these students aren't reaching out to you, because I hear it another way. So what are you saying? I'm not understanding. The go-to person, they're able to, if they're the go-to, this should be down then. If this is the person that they can talk to and tell them what's going on.
So a referral activates the person sent to the dean, and over the course of not just a single year, but multiple years. Deans have been also, because of restorative practice and things along those lines, have also been people that they have searched out and gone to and sought out over the course of time. Not every negative consequence that has happened then results in a broken relationship within the scope of that. And I would equate it much like an older sibling or even a parent at times, is sometimes there's negative consequences, but they still become that person to go to over the course of building relationships. The deans do not do this or administration or even teaching staff do not do this in isolation, in the fact that all of us make mistakes and do things that we mess up on or do things. And that doesn't then necessarily break the relationship with the person we do. We have some accountability and we have a learning process that happens within the scope of that. So as we go through the information and do this, it's trying to also move a system from a reactive system of when something occurs that there's a referral, those kind of things, and trying to be more proactive. And within the scope of this is the hope, at least my hope within the scope of this is that we have, if I'm running into a problem as a student, that we also work with students to figure out how do I go to this person before I have situations. And I would highlight one example is that happened just this past week. There was a fight that happened at the high school, not a huge fight, but a fight. And immediately, one of our assistant principals pulled in and one of our deans pulled in other kids that they knew who were friends of them and checked in with them. There's no referral data on that. There's no piece on that. But that is a piece that also occurs. It's part of why within the scope of restorative practice that you see the consequence piece continue to go down, even though the disparity continues. So within the system, there's been a lot of things, there's been things to celebrate and promote, but the disparity still exists. So talking about how do we keep the things that we treasure and have been working, and how do we also change the way in which we do business. And so both of those things I think are important to note. And so when a student comes up to me and says that they're a go-to person, I can think of one off the top of my head who got into a lot of trouble as a freshman in high school. He's actually one of my go-to people now that works with and has actually been willing to work with other students to say, hey, I made some mistakes as a freshman because I didn't do these kinds of things. And now he helps to curb or restore kids and give them other opportunities. So as we look at this, as we look at the data, there is disparity in those kind of things. There's also other good things that are going on. It's trying to capture a lot of that good that's going on and try and improve on that, and then create within the scope of that system a way in which we can be more proactive instead of reactive.
And I meant, when I said go-to, I hear 1,000 times Mr. Morrow's name as the go-to. And I'm saying he's not the only dean there at the school, but I've heard his name so many times. And so that's telling me something too.
And Mr. Morrow is the longest serving dean. He's been there over
Yeah,
7
and
years, so.
and the parents, we're going to Mr. Morrow, because I said I can't talk to him. And so they'll go to Mr. Morrow. So, I mean, there are go-to, but I don't hear a lot about the go-to from these individuals.
Well, the other thing in Mr. Morrow's favor is also that Mr. Morrow's been there 7 years and he's built relationships with families over the course of those 7 years and stuff. And so to have Mr. Morrow within the scope of the building, even though it may be in a changed role, is going to be very instrumental as we continue to move forward, because he has built those relationships and we don't want to lose those pieces within the scope of this.
Have you been asked to, or have you decided, either of you, to compile feedback from your buildings, from the students, from the staff, from other community members, to help inform you on these discussions moving forward? Or have you had a plan given to you, or are you helping to craft the plan, and are you seeking input, and can we see that input from people as we work through this?
I'll go first. That actually came up yesterday from our staff of doing some surveying. I don't think we're going to have surveying done this year for this plan, which, as we did talk it through some more today, and the thinking on that is, yes, we want to always make sure we're getting feedback from parents and students. However, we have a more immediate some more immediate things we need to address, and I do think within the diverse staff that we have, that we are able to pretty well capture a lot of those things. But you know, the way we're framing the conversation is what do staff need, what do students need, what do family need. The reality is those are all framed a little around how a staff member sees it. But I think longer term we do have to look at what the needs are. So when we talk, for instance, the idea is out there, oh, we need to have someone who coordinates parent education. Okay. So we would actually have to find out what parent education parents would want before we would have someone do that. But it doesn't mean we wouldn't include that as a goal in a plan, if that makes sense, hopefully.
Then within the scope of it, not so much survey data, but as we continue to do that, have been logging and making notes, and Karen Gonzalez-Gephardt, who's my assistant, has been starting to create a Google Doc of specifically things that have been mentioned within the scope of things. So we're starting to gather some of that. As we continue to work with groups and trying to capture with the teacher groups or student groups or those kind of things, we start to capture things within the scope of that and the overall. And the other part is within the other part within all of this is, over the last 5 years, is listening to the issues of data and things along those lines by the staff, and talking about what are things that we need and those kind of things. So being able to take a bigger shot at trying to address some of these needs that have been ongoing things, that's why we have a step ahead program in geometry, or that's why we have a bridge program within the scope of Comp 9, and trying to think of other academic ways in which to address this. So the staff has been trying to react within a system, and so having the ability to maybe change the system within the scope of it, I think, provides an opportunity to maybe do some things differently. And some of the things that were shared in today's meeting was talking about systems that we even currently have in place that aren't necessarily personnel stuff, that we already currently have system. Is there a way to retool some of this stuff to work in a different and more effective way? And so I think the important piece is that no plan that's created between now and the end of school or those kinds is going to solve all things. It needs to be a dynamic plan that continues to evolve and develop. And I think to say that everything will be in place and ready to go, I think is ambitious to have, here's the things that have to be in place, but it also has to be flexible enough in which to gain the ability to adapt other models and other systems within the scope.
Well, maybe you can both kind of read into what the goal of my question was what do you need from us? What do you need from the district or central office, anybody, to get the buy-in from families and from your staff to want to go forward with whatever plan we land on, to be proactive rather than reactive, so that even if they're not if nothing's 100% nailed down, there's still support from the community to say, okay, we're changing the system and we're happy with that because we're addressing this inequity. But we don't have all the pieces, but we trust that you're going to make a good decision. What do you need from us to get that message out to the community so that there isn't widespread panic or just resistance from people who are frightened of change and worried that the people they know and trust won't be there anymore? Do you have suggestions for us that we can be following?
Can I ask a question before they answer that, or make a comment? But keep that question, because it's going to lead to it. I appreciate the fact that we're now engaged in a process that is bringing people to the table to make sure that we have the best minds, the best collective mind. The one brain is good, 10 brains is 10 times as good as one brain, sometimes 12 or 15 times as good. So I appreciate the fact that we're moving in that regard. I know that eventually from board members you're going to need us, our vote, to make sure that we move forward in whatever way we've decided. But I think we just need to make it clear that we're, I understand the urgency of coming up with something that addresses this problem and addresses it head on. I have a long history of sitting up here, and at the time that Unit 4 went through an equity audit, we went through an equity audit. Ours was not didn't result in as dramatic a situation, nor did it identify as dramatic an issues. But I would have to say that the issue that's been presented to us tonight in terms of the data is probably more dramatic than the differences that were outlined that resulted in the court case in Unit 4. And so I understand why we need to address this. And so there is urgency behind it. I also greatly appreciate the fact that we have perhaps in conflict with that sense of urgency, we've slowed things down to make sure that we move in a direction that is well thought out, that has significant building support, because without building support, I don't care how good the idea is, it isn't going to work, because it'll be sabotaged. And so if we, and sabotage sounds like a nasty word, but people just won't buy into it, and they won't push it, and they won't support it, and so the pace of being able to move forward will be retarded. That's what I mean by the word. I used maybe a word on sabotage. But, so I appreciate the fact that we have maybe an uncertain timeline, because we're allowing for whatever the input shows. If the input shows that we need to take, instead of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, maybe we need to take 3 steps back so we can take 5 steps forward. And that may take a little bit extra time. So I'm not going to sit here tonight and tie you down to a hard deadline. So I'm hoping that that isn't what you need from us, because I'm not prepared to give you a hard deadline. But I'm glad that you're taking the time to listen to students, community, staff, and everyone, whether it's at the high school level or the middle school level. And I was led to believe that the middle school had done a little bit more work on this than the high school had, and that maybe you were a little bit ahead of time. And so maybe the middle school plan might come forward faster than the high school plan, and that's okay. So now with that, and we're understanding that we're not pushing for a hard issue here, hopefully we got the thing that galvanized people to potentially destroy what good we were trying to achieve. That's behind us. And now we're moving forward in a more constructive way. So now with that, are there things at this stage of the game that you need from the board? And this goes for central office as well as the 2 administrators, because it was a 3-part presentation. So now I'll be quiet and let you.
I would just say, it's, for me, I would say the high school level is specifically is encourage people to come to 12th. Encourage people to, whether it's staff or students or whatever, to come not only to 12th, but if they want to that doesn't work for them and they want to talk at a different point, that's fine as well. I mean, continue to encourage people to say, go in and visit with, and set a time to come see and those kind of things. Because part of what I did when we first got back from spring break was to really just set aside time to just be in the office and really take, sit down with the legal pad and just start writing notes as people came in and suggested things and talked about things and gave an opportunity to talk about things. I think it's important that as we continue to go forward is also to show, hey, here's some of the suggestions and ideas as we move forward, but continue to work in that spirit of trying to figure out, okay, what out of all of this, regardless of your feelings about the way in which all this came about, is how do we move forward in this to reach best outcomes for our students? Because at the end of the day, August is going to come and students are going to walk in that building and they need a system that not only supports them but encourages them and helps them and does it in such a way that is not only fair but is encouraging to all groups, so that we start to see progress and bigger progress on disparities and things like that and drive that down. And again, Benita, to your point, is encourage those parents that have gotten frustrated and stuff to say, this is an opportunity to share those frustrations and things, because I think part of this is also within the scope of this is trying to figure out what we've done. One of the things we've done in the past is home visits and things like that, and try and reach out. And I've done different things where we've gone to elementary schools and the Urbana Neighborhood Connection Center, and I know subdivision, trying to not always have people come to us, but try to come to them. And so I'm willing to do those kinds of things as well.
I would be, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I definitely yield to you.
I was just going to ask you, has any research been done on any schools, the student population of ours that might have done this previously? And if so, the results? Does anybody even know?
You can use the microphone.
I recently attended a conference and was back in 2016. And they had done some really interesting work. One of them was in New York, in the state of New York, and the population was similar to ours. They had probably the largest ethnicity group was Hispanic. So it was very similar. They did a whole range of interventions with their students. They did away with their deans, which I was shocked. I was surprised to hear that. They didn't do away with them, but they called them by a different name that was no longer, in terms of student participants. So I thought it was really interesting. I'm going to share the PDF with a number of the administrators so they can see what they're doing. And we're doing mindfulness and just some really interesting interventions and having some really good success. I saw a video that they made. They worked within the PBIS guidelines like we do, but they changed it up. They made it more realistic for high school age students, and I left the matrices they were doing just seemed more appropriate to high school age. So yes, I have seen it.
Okay, that's some of the research that I would like to find out about also, is just what has happened to other schools around the same student population who have gotten rid of deans or retalent. Okay, thank you.
Oh, I didn't answer it. All right. So I had a slightly different thought than Matt there. Mine was, I do believe at some point I'm going to have additional staffing in a proposal. And I know I'm going to need the board's support on that. The other piece that I anticipate is, because we felt this initially when a couple years ago when we started with restorative practices, is there is very broadly among families the expectation that a child is going to be punished. And I regularly meet with families who are upset because they do not feel that the punishment another child has received is adequate. And that's a messaging issue, but I mean, it's a reality of how I think a lot of our families, and all families, feel, is that if a student has committed some kind of act, that there would be some kind of punishment. Now, when I'm able to process and have a long time and a long conversation with a parent and a family, usually that comes out okay, that they understand what our process is with restorative practices. But I also know that families and students even contact board members and share these same types of concerns, and just knowing that you're aware of what we're doing and what our process is and why we might be shifting away from what's been the traditional outcome.
I want to add one more thing to Scott's. I'll probably be asking for more staffing too, so I'll need that support.
It's like we're running this.
And at the district level, I would just say to echo those two things and to tell you what I've told you time and time again, and that is continue to ask us questions. If you're curious, if you have questions, bring them to me, and I'm happy to share them in an open board meeting. I mean, that's the purpose of this, is so that people can see this is the data that we're talking about. These are the questions. Now's the time. But if you have questions, please share them.
So we've seen disproportionality here with discipline statistics, but it's not the only metric where there's disproportionality in our district. And academic outcomes, for example, is also another one. So I was wondering, is there going to be a broader effort underfoot to focus on those as well?
Yeah, actually, that's a very good question, and I will answer it this way. One is our next presentation is about the strategic plan. There's a lot of things in the strategic plan about engagement, and as you look at ways to measure student engagement, you are talking about time in class, you're talking about time in learning environments, and you're talking about measuring competencies rather than seat time. And those types of things all tie back into if students aren't in class and are pulled out of a learning environment, that's going to have a negative effect on academic outcomes, just plain and simple. And with that said, yes, we will definitely be, and we already have been looking across buildings at saying, here's the disparities in academic data. I mentioned this in a superintendent's report earlier this year, in fact, not that long ago. One of the things that we've been looking at closely is how we measure success, especially as the state keeps moving their targets, and most recent is the conversations about the fact that the state is putting out an RFP to replace the park. And so if the park goes away, we no longer have data that is comparable. We experienced that when the park came in and replaced the ISAT. We also recently experienced at the high school level when the state replaced the ACT with the SAT. And so we have been in, almost since my superintendency began, at the state level, a place of assessment flux in terms of how the state wants to define success and how we want to define success. We've spent a lot of work in the last 3 years looking at making sure that our assessment framework is what we define as success, and putting in places local assessments that aren't necessarily created here, but we have purchased or subscribed to measure things like reading level throughout the elementary and up through 6th grade. As we do that, yes, we're looking at those disparity data constantly. And one of the things that we started doing this summer as the school improvement teams met after our Equity Institute was we said, we want you to go back to your data, and we want to make sure that it's all disaggregated. And Dr. Wiemelt presented at an earlier board meeting, I think it was in January, our new templates for looking at data. And if you remember, all of those are disaggregated across all assessments. And so, yeah, those are the things that we've already been moving towards, and those are the things that I'm excited about continuing to push forward on, because as we fill those out and as we add data year after year, we'll be able to track our success rates, and we'll be able to measure ourselves up against our highest aspirations.
Well, I appreciate the fact that we're facing this head on. And what I get out of the data is that for some populations, the restorative practice model and all the steps that we've been taking has had a dramatic impact in the reduction of referrals. And we have one group that it has not been effective with. And so we need to look at a different way we need to look at a different way of trying to achieve the same results or similar, at least more closely similar results with a portion of our student body that we've not been able to address. I also appreciate the fact that we're looking at it as an entire system. I have to admit that 6-8 weeks ago, it looked to me like we were pointing the fingers only at 7 individuals as being responsible for the disparity, and I'm glad to see that we're looking at the fact that it is the entire system, and we're restoring some balance to that viewpoint, and we're taking a look at it from top to bottom. Nothing is left out, and nothing is necessarily assumed in. And if we're not taking it from that viewpoint, then I'm going to be disappointed in the outcome, because I think we may miss an opportunity to do this right. So, and it looks like we're now headed in a direction that gives us a greater opportunity to make sure that we bring all the minds to the table and that we have the best solution possible. And even though we might tweak it 2 or 3 times as it's implemented, anybody worth their salt, when you try a new initiative, if you're not constantly evaluating it and tweaking it and changing and modifying it, and what does the tech companies call it? Pivoting. That if we don't know how to pivot when things aren't working right, and we pivot towards what will work better, then we're also we're failing our students and failing our system by doing that as well. Anybody else have anything to say, or are we ready to thank our presenters and move to our second topic for tonight? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Our second study topic this evening is strategic plan update. Can you do it from here, or do you have to do it
No,
from
you can have,
somebody
you don't
else?
want sitting there, do you? You can sit there and just hit forward. That'd be wonderful. So Lori is going to present the overview and progress towards our next strategic plan. Lori, make sure your green light is on your microphone. Blinking?
Coming up.
It's coming up. You're going to get the lights too before you sit. Okay, thank you, Lori. I appreciate you taking the time, and I appreciate the board not making me get up.
Maybe we need to explain to the viewing
Yeah,
public
all right.
at large that our superintendent is here with braces on both feet and both wrists as a result of a fall. And we're lucky to have him sitting here through these meetings because you should be at home resting. And I'm sure Meg, your wife, would agree that this superintendent needs some rest and restoration more than anything else.
Plenty of rest. I did take yesterday as a sick day, and my wrists are actually from over-crutching because I like moving around. So that's why I'm sitting still right now. Okay. Yeah, so this is an overview of where we are related to updating our strategic plan. And this is another thing that the board asked me to present, and they've been asking for it actually for a while. And part of my hesitation was I wanted to be a little bit farther in terms of having a really fleshed out outline of where we were going. But I realized that this is actually a really good time to talk about where we've been and then give you a timeline about where we're going, and actually ask for the board's support. When Ann asked that very good question, what do you need? I would really like kind of an endorsement saying, hey, this looks good, and go for it based on this timeline. So I guess, Lori, I will hold up a hand and wave when it's ready to go. So this is something that you've seen me present since about 2010, and a couple of these slides are straight from that original presentation, just made to look a little nicer. And again, I'll thank Diamond Robinson here at the district office for putting together our new template. I think it's pretty snazzy, and she did a wonderful job putting this together for us. So what is strategic planning? It's the process by which we create systems to achieve our highest goals and aspirations. And it truly is transformational. It's a metamorphosis of our organization, and it's creating new systems and structures to meet extraordinary goals. The components of our strategic plan include things like a vision and a mission, values-based parameters, SMART goals, targeted strategies, specific objectives, a way of continuous evaluation, and ways of talking about sustainability. Now, a couple of these things are adapted a little bit because our previous strategic plan and the process that we used at that time did not actually create a vision. The consultant that we hired used a model that just looked at a mission-driven strategic plan. and it was very much a goals-oriented strategic plan. But one of the things that, as we have been working, and when I say we, it's been cabinet, it's been our school improvement teams, it's been talking with PTA groups. One of the things that I hear over and over is, where are we going? What's our vision? What do we want Urbana schools to be? And so that's one of the pieces in here is we have created a vision that was actually generated at one of our summer equity institutes by over 200 people who were in attendance, who were really struggling with this issue of what do we want Urbana to look like? What do we want to achieve? And that came out to be our vision. So I'm going to put that up there, and the reason why that's in orange right now is because that is something that's new. It wasn't a part of our previous strategic plan. As I said, our previous strategic plan was very goal-based. And if you remember, those of you that were part of the, yes. Sorry, I forgot to wave. I'm advancing things on my notes here, and here, I'll just turn mine around so you can see when I advance. Our previous strategic plan was very goal-based. Those are very common. And they take a mission and organizational goals, and they say, how do we create goals to achieve our mission and to live up to our mission? We're looking at one that's a little bit more issue-based. And that issue-based strategic plan actually came from our first engagement with Thought Exchange and our beginning to survey the entire community about what they think we do well, what they think we need to improve, and what don't we offer to our students currently that they would like to see. A lot of that comes to talking about what are the issues facing the organization, aligning a vision and a mission and goals to address those issues. And the final one is an organic strategic planning model, which I would say is essentially the way we've been operating for the last 2 years. It's not quite as mission and vision driven, and I don't want to say that we were not working hard, but we weren't working under the guise of a specific strategic plan, but we were still referring back to the old plan in terms of the mission, in terms of our parameters, in terms of our beliefs. And so honestly, this work is about clarifying what our goals are and helping us move forward together. So when I talk about revising our current strategic plan or updating our strategic plan, I want to talk about the fact that that strategic plan went from 2011 to 2016. And I believe that our last update to the board was in 2015, and we talked about using Thought Exchange to engage the entire community. And if you remember, we had over 1,200 participants in that Thought Exchange asking very broad questions that I think I just went over, but I'll say them again, and that is, what are things that you like about your schools? What are things that you see are concerns? And then what are things that the schools don't currently offer that you would like to see? And all of that data is still up on, oops, do not advance. Can you launch from there? Can you click on the, you can try? All of this data is still up at usd116.thoughtexchange.com. And just as a reminder, the large concerns that were shared at that time were around issues of funding and budget, student behavior and discipline, advanced learning opportunities, classroom management, and class size. And many of those issues, when you start to dig into them, and Laura, you can actually go back to the presentation now, dealt with issues of personalized learning, of what we would call now competency-based learning, making sure that students are progressing at their own rate, but also issues of equity and making sure that students are treated fairly, especially when it came to issues of discipline and classroom management. In the fall of 2016, we meaning administrative cabinet, which is all principals, all central office staff, directors, administrators, as well as our coordinators and parent liaisons, we spent the first semester comparing thought exchange results to three main components of our strategic plan: our belief statements, our parameters, and our mission. And we looked for what was missing in those three pieces of our first strategic plan that were being reflected in our thought exchange data. The other thing that we did in the fall of 2015, and then again just recently in December of 2017, is we did what's called an intentional data review. And that was a process that was led by a group of people from the Illinois School Improvement Network, who have been working with us for the last 3 years to engage us in looking at data and become a better professional learning community, essentially. And much of that work is based on the work of DeFore and DeFore, who have created methods and systems of looking at data in order to drive school improvement. And specifically, those intentional data reviews kept revealing racial disparities across academic and discipline data. In fact, some of the changes to the way we've been looking at discipline data came out of the way the high school data was first analyzed by this intentional data review back in December of 2015. And flip to the next one. I think you went to. There we go. The mission of Urbana School District has several words in it that many of you and many of us like to fall back on. And those words oftentimes are fostering a caring and nurturing relationships, helping students achieve their personal greatness, and engaging each student, every family, and the entire community. Those things, I think, are still very strong. The ones that I really want to focus on today, though, are ones that sometimes we skim over. And those are all learners. And when we say all learners, we really need to take a look at what that means when we disaggregate it by racial groups, by other subgroups. And when we're saying that we're going to ensure that all learners acquire the knowledge, develop skills, and build character to achieve their personal greatness, we really have to say, what does that mean for every group of students? And that's a piece of our strategic plan and a piece of our mission that I think we needed to clarify, and our racial equity professional development has really been working hard at getting at what that really means. As I said, one of the things that we have done is we've drafted what we call our equity vision statement. And this is a statement that's been used by our equity PD leaders across the district and in each building since it was created in the Summer Institute. And if you take a look at it, it has some very similar sounding themes. Urbana School District 116 is a community committed to equity, engagement, and educational excellence. We strive to ensure that all learners acquire knowledge, develop skills, and build character, allowing them to achieve personal greatness. Well, that's straight out of our vision, right? Where student success and outcomes are not predictable by race. That specifically comes out of the work that we've been doing with racial equity. But that's a very strong vision statement. And that sets some pretty high aspirational goals, saying that we are not comfortable having any of our outcomes be racially identifiable. And in fact, when we talk about all learners, we really need to say, is that me?
Nope.
Okay. We need to say that really all learners means every single learner. As Linda Gibbons said when she was presenting the discipline data, one of the reasons why we looked at it as students is because each of those students is a person. Each of those numbers represents a person. And I appreciated what Vice President Rollins-Gay said about who are the go-to people. Yes, one of the things that we want to make sure is that every student in our school community has an adult who they can identify. And it doesn't matter what their role is, but it's an adult who they can identify who is an advocate for them. So we have 5 focused area goals, and I want to talk just a little bit about where these goals came from, because as I said, this is very much an issues-oriented process, and it's also very much driven by the building level school improvement plans. And so as we, meaning the district leadership, have been more involved in the building school improvement teams, what we've been doing is we've been challenging the building school improvement teams to look at their goals and their activities and their actions through a lens of racial equity. And then as they wrestle with their own data at the building level and start creating goals, we then feed those up through the cabinet, the central office leadership, and my administrative team who are sitting around this table, and say, what are these what goals are common across all buildings? What are some of the challenges that we're facing across all buildings? And what can we do at a district level to set goals for ourselves that we can say are common across all buildings? And so, again, it's taking this working at the building level, bringing it up, and then pushing it back down. And so what you're seeing right now is kind of a synthesis of goals that were created in building level school improvement teams. And there are kind of 5 general areas that we have related to this. And those are student academic achievement and instruction and instructional technology, district culture, administration, faculty, and staff capacity, community and family relationships, and then management of the district. And that can be budget, facilities, and tech infrastructure. So, just to give you an example of a few of these goals, student academic achievement and instruction. We want to see a significant increase in engagement, innovative learning opportunities, higher order learning, and academic achievement for all students, especially students of color. We want to implement systemic change to increase specialized inclusive practices across all subjects for students with IEPs, students receiving literacy intervention, and students receiving EL, English language, and bilingual services. Under district culture, we want to strengthen authentic and interpersonal relationships among staff and students with a focus on improving interpersonal relationships among staff and historically marginalized groups. That's been a big focus for the last 2 years of our racial equity work. In fact, those of you who have come to our summer institutes, that's essentially what the focus has been, is addressing that goal. A reduction in student disciplinary disparities for historically marginalized groups. I think that that's been a focus of our discussion and conversation quite a bit for the last several meetings. Administration, faculty, and staff capacity. We are looking at increasing the number and percentage of administrators, faculty, and staff of color who are recruited, interviewed, hired, retained, and developed as leaders to reflect the demographics of the school population. That was something that when the group of people who are working with us on the Recruitment and Retention Committee, when they came and talked about their goals as a committee, that is very reflected. They have some very specific goals underneath that. We also want to increase staff capacity with regard to racial equity, and that accounts for a lot of the work that we're doing in professional development, not just with the certified staff or the licensed staff, but with all staff. So it's everyone from our custodians and our grounds and our maintenance workers all the way up to the superintendent. Everyone is involved in that at least on a monthly basis, if not more frequently. Building community and family relationships. We want to demonstrate our commitment to racial equity within our community through a collaborative development of policies, practices, and outreach. We also want to increase engagement of students and families of color by developing culturally responsive school-related activities. And some of those things are things that you've seen us participating in more and more over the last few years. Some of them are things that we do over the summer related to our involvement in CU days or the Jetty Roads days at King Park. Some of them are things that, again, could be reflected in the Parent and Family Academy that was just held last month, that was specifically targeting families of color and how we can engage them more. Management of the district, budget, facilities, and infrastructure. Creating a balanced budget process, because my goal has been since becoming superintendent is to present you with a balanced budget. I have done that for 3 out of my 5 years as superintendent, and I plan to continue that as best as possible. As you remember, this has been a challenging set of years to present balanced budgets because of the state support, the state uncertainties. Thank you. I appreciate the diplomatic word there. But to create a balanced budget process and business practices that clearly reflect our shared beliefs and values, as well as supporting our district vision. Improving maintenance and operations efficiency while adapting existing facilities to meet our new requirements. Deliver new facilities that support the district vision. Ensure reliable and scalable information technology infrastructure, enabling innovative uses of technology for educational excellence. So those are all things that either came directly from our previous strategic plan or came organically right out of the building school improvement teams. We have been working, as I said, in a very kind of organic way on many of these issues because we don't feel like we can slow down. We don't want to pause and say, let's take a year to build a strategic plan. We want to continue to move in the direction that is in the best interest of our students along the lines of our mission and our vision. We've already done things like creating additional student supports. The student engagement advocates and clinical professionals are a direct result of the need for more mental health supports directly in the buildings and more accessible to our students. Summer transitional programming. As we're looking at moving into this summer, we're trying to maximize summer programming using Title I funds as well as 21st century funds to ensure that there's many different transitional programs for students transitioning from early childhood into kindergarten, from 5th grade into 6th grade, and from 8th grade into high school. We also have established a recruitment and retention committee. We're in the process of finalizing a hire for a recruitment and retention specialist to help specifically recruit and retain highly qualified candidates of color. We have a cohort model for continued professional development, which came straight out of requests by people working in the buildings in our equity groups to say, we want to learn more. We want to truly become leaders around the issue of racial equity. And how we do that, we want it to be organic. We want to wrestle with problems. And so we've created a cohort model where we basically invite anyone to come and wrestle with some of these issues and help us dig into issues around racial equity, issues around cultural competencies, and issues around curriculum that help reflect what our mission and vision and values are. We want to review curriculum, including social emotional learning and cultural competence, and the two things that we're working on there, we were just granted permission to be the next round of competency-based pilots for the state of Illinois, which is going to provide us no additional money, but some additional freedoms related to things like graduation requirements and credit for experiential learning, So things like internships that one of the things that Mr. Stark has talked about since he became principal is creating more internship opportunities for especially seniors as a transition to post-secondary education or post-secondary careers. And this competency-based learning pilot will give us more latitude and flexibility to offer credit for students to demonstrate competency and to have experiences. But then also aligning curriculum across grade levels. And we continue to be a leader in that work as we look at right now we're looking at the next generation social studies standards. We finished an alignment in the last 2 years with the new science standards, and the social studies people are gearing up to work on their new standards this coming summer. We also have been working hard to dismantle inequitable structures, systems, and practices. We have been reviewing discipline policies and practices pre-K through 12. We've been revising our policies and practices related to alternative placement. We've been refining our academic and behavioral supports and creating a new acceleration and retention policy. Again, some of these things, that one specifically, is something that is required by the state of Illinois. But what we did is we had a committee look at how can we do this to best meet the needs of our students. And again, it goes back, if you take a look back in the first thought exchange in 2015, a lot of that is about personalized learning. We've been doing an equity audit of administrative and managerial policies. One of the reasons why it's been a little bit slow bringing you press policies is because we're taking a little bit more critical view of the press policies and really looking at how do these align with our equity work. We don't want to start putting policies in place that might actually become barriers for equitable outcomes for students unintentionally. And so we're taking more time to review those things. And we're also working hard to blend the work of restorative practices and racial equity. A lot of restorative practice work is about restoring relationships. And a lot of the work around racial equity deals with things that have become known in the popular culture as microaggressions, but in one building group that I was in, they said, you know, if you're the victim of these, if you're subject to these on a daily basis, they're not micro at all. They're macroaggressions. And they build up over time. And that requires some restorative work to heal and to move forward along issues of racial equity. So our next steps are establishing 5 action teams to look at the specific components of the strategic plan and specifically come up with drafts of the vision and the goals and start creating objective strategies and plans for evaluation and sustainability. Those 5 action teams, we are envisioning those to be around those 5 large areas that were on the 4th slide, I believe. And what we'd like to do is start that process as soon as possible. Sorry, yeah, are you giving me the thumbs up? Thank you, I appreciate that. Is start that work as soon as possible. Confirm the action teams and send out collaboration dates. Make this a wide-ranging invitation, the way we did with the last strategic plan, where we basically sent it out to all families, a variety of community member groups, including things like the University of Illinois groups that we partner with, as well as community groups like Don Moyer Boys and Girls Club and the Dream Girls Academy and other groups, and also invite students to the table and say, how can you come and provide your voice? And then May through July is when a lot of that work gets done. Really create a working draft of a strategic plan, and then share that working draft in August as we come back to school, and then start holding community forums to have people give feedback on the draft itself. And then in December, present a final draft to the board for approval. So there's a timeline, and there's, I would say it's aggressive, but it's also very doable based on where we're at right now. We've done a lot of great work already on it, and again, we're kind of at a point where we're ready. We've taken the input from the buildings to create this draft, and now we're ready to push it back down and say, okay, now let's take a look at what this really looks like by engaging more than just the building school improvement teams, but a larger community audience. So our recommendation is really ask the board for an approval of the tentative timeline as part of the April business agenda. And it's not really spending money, but it's basically saying, yes, we like where you're headed, and giving us some flexibility to say, as we create budgets for next year, we can start budgeting things in related to the work that we're doing around our strategic plan. And then I would be lax not to thank members of Cabinet and the board. I would say a great deal of this work has been done at Cabinet, but then there are also a larger group of people here at Central Office who've been providing feedback and supporting the process. pulling together data. I would be remiss not to talk about the voluminous numbers of feedback surveys from everything from our staff development to our racial equity PD to our institute days, that we actually use all of that as data points to provide more information about the direction that we're heading. And then the building staff and school improvement teams who, again, have done the majority of the work in terms of the current goals that you see right now. And then members of the community who provided input and feedback. Many of these things have been shared with kind of small focus groups already, and I appreciate the people who have taken the time out of their schedules to come in and sit and listen to me talk about kind of these ideas of vision and mission. And this last slide is just extra pictures that we didn't throw in anywhere else. But any questions that you have?
Questions for Don?
Just a general comment. I'm really thankful that you're aggressively pursuing this. The last strategic plan was starting to show its age, and it's really great to have a renewed direction for the district. So thank you for your entire team for spending the effort on this.
Anything else? The timeline is going to come back to us as an action item. Our folks, this would be the time to provide some feedback to the administration if we feel that needs to be tweaked in any way.
I think it's great work. Let's move forward.
Are the board members? So it'll come back to us as presented this evening.
Quick question on the timeline, and I know, Don, I've asked you or talked to you about this previously, but the community forums, those will be the action teams, right? Those will be, from September to November of next year will be, or no, it's this year actually, when we'll have those action teams discussions, and how many approximate meetings do you anticipate we'll need?
So actually the action teams and the work of the action teams is actually the more May through July, May through August. That's when I envision those meetings. And I would guess that there will be anywhere between 2 to 3 meetings per month, depending on the team and how the leaders of that team, kind of parse out the work. And so, yeah, I envision that starting in May, we'll be seeing 2 meetings a month for each of those teams. I will remind board members that, one, I encourage you to participate strongly on those action teams, but I also caution that you need to be careful not to have more than 2 of you in any one action team, because then we will be then having open meetings about this. And I plan to do it the way we did last time anyway, which is pretty much anything we generate, we'll be posting openly for review as we go along. However, it does provide some burdensome paperwork if we made every one of these action teams an open meeting that is broadcast and recorded and require agendas and motions and adjournments and that kind of thing. So again, I hope that you'll participate. The forums in the fall, to get back to your question, Ann, the forums in the fall are more taking the draft that's been created by those action teams and actually just inviting anyone else to come in. And sometimes it'll be people who served on a different action team to come in and look at what's been created. And I envision that to be a lot of time where it's just kind of question and answer and providing feedback.
Thank you.
Anything else from board members? I encourage you to make sure that those action teams are well representative of the community, including students at our secondary level. I know it's tough to get primary level involved, but just from going through the strategic planning process back 2011, you said it was, that the student input was very valuable. And so I just want to make sure that we come up with a way to do that. And also, since Benita, I understand the shortcomings of electronic communication, but I also understand that these action teams are going to be meeting during the summer. And so I hope that we have a way to post it so that our stakeholders, as many stakeholders as possible, can comment on it electronically as well as non-electronic forms. And that might mean I hope we can use the contact system without having to go through the exercise of creating extensive questionnaires and so forth, but just some kind of a way to allow people to review and post from remote areas, because I, for one, am going to be out of town 6 or 7 of those weeks, of those 8 weeks or 10 weeks that you're going to have those groups working. And I'm probably not alone.
Yep.
And so if I can look at it remotely, that's fine.
Yep. We'll make sure that happens.
Anything else? All right, thank you for that presentation, and we'll see that back, the timeline back as an action item at our meeting in April, business meeting in April. We have no call for a future or special executive meeting tonight. Superintendent's report?
Yeah, I'm just going to mention one thing, and I'd like to take a moment of silence. Our school community lost a young man who was a junior at Urbana High School, Jesus Bustamante. And I'd just like to take a moment of silence to remember him and send our sympathies out to his friends and family. Thank you. There was a small service at his church on Saturday evening that I was able to attend thanks to Mr. Stark and his car. And I was touched to see so many fellow students and a wide range of students who were there, whose lives Jesus had touched. And there were also a very large number of teachers going back to Lille, where he attended from the time he was a kindergartner all the way through. And he does have 3 siblings in our school district still, and we've been doing our best to provide support to them as well as to the family at this very difficult time. That's it.
Board reports?
I was watching TV the other day. I forgot. I think it was one of the local stations, and I saw that our own Joey Wright had won a fairly large award. I'm sorry I didn't write down when I saw that. Maybe you can.
Yep.
Add to
I
that,
will be
Don?
happy to add that in, and my guess is at some point we might see him back here. No, we're never going to see him again. Steven's taken over. He's not letting Joey back in the room.
Thank you, Steven.
Right, yes.
For not letting Joey back in.
So Joey won a state level award for broadcasting and excellence in broadcasting, and he's also working as an intern at WCIA, and so it's great to see students who you have seen come through here, working the cameras and supporting the board in that way, go on to do a variety of other things. Our UHS Broadcasting Club has been recognized several times and done a number of outstanding things, and I would say that this is just one more thing along that line, and it's a real honor. So,
Paul?
Just a heads up that at the end of April 25th through 29th, the Urbana High School's production of Into the Woods will be presented, so tickets are on sale already, I think.
Okay. Other board members? While we're recognizing students, would be remiss if we didn't mention it in Sunday's Gazette. We had Ethan Chow was first team all area. Nathan was second team. Nathan Hedrick, thank you. And we had two, also John Delarue and Finn Dallas that were honorable mention. I think that's probably the best showing for the swim team in all area selections in quite some time. So it's good to see that. Small but mighty team. Yes, small team, but they seem to be coming along, and good work by our coach to bring the team back from the brink from a couple of years ago. So, okay. With that, motion to adjourn would be in order. Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion's carried. We're adjourned.